Okay, excellent. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and anyone else who may be listening. I'm very lucky today to be joined by our first guest from the CIA on my channel. So that's very exciting. Mr. Brad Johnson has many years of experience working for the Central Intelligence Agency as a chief of station at various stations around the world. He runs a YouTube channel and has a website called intelreform.org. I have included his social media links as well, including that website in the description box, as well as his YouTube channel. So people, please go over and subscribe to him and sign up for his emailing list if you are so inclined, and check out his articles and videos. But Mr. Johnson, I just want to thank you so much for chatting with me today.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to
it. Before we get into geopolitics and current events, can you just give people maybe a spark notes of your background, areas of expertise in the CIA, and then where you were stationed as well, if you could share that?
Okay, I can give some general background. I don't talk too much about the specifics of where I worked and things, but as far as just went in and was in for 25 years into the agency. I joined back in the Ronald Reagan days when he was president. So reaching back into history for probably many of your listeners, but that period of time, it had been the CIA had been greatly decimated by the previous president, which going back again into history was Jimmy Carter in those days. And he had what was called a RIF, which is a reduction in force, which most people don't even know can be done. But what he did is went through and fired quite a few people out of the CIA, and he was downsizing other agencies as well. And a bunch of people left to being unhappy with what they saw happen. So that was kind of the first time that the CIA had been really badly damaged because of internal politics here in the United States. And Reagan tried to build it back up because he recognized the importance of having good intelligence out there in the world so you know what everybody else is up to, which is in many ways blamed for how we got into World War II and all the problems we had there was for lack of good intelligence as to what was coming. So joining the agency back in those days, a lot of it is training, early on. You basically, to join, I was operations. Traditionally, the CIA was divided into science and technology, administrative, analytics, the analysis, and the operations cadre. They were called divisions. And now that has evolved some since then, but from my period, that was what I was involved in, was the operations. Operations was the part that everything else is pretty explanatory. Operations is the part where we ran espionage. So I was, whatever you want to call it, involved in espionage, conducting it, finding people that would be willing to report to the United States on what enemy powers or enemy groups were up to and what they were doing, and reporting it back to the to the powers that be in the United States. It would go to the analytic division, and they would analyze all sources of information that they got, and they would produce the final product that went to the decision makers, the politicians, if you will. So my time was spent overseas, so most of my training was in the things that I joke around. I like to say I was one of the guys that made things go bump in the night, and that's more or less true. It was, espionage isn't in broad daylight. It takes places in odd times and the wee hours, and it can be at any time. But also covert action, those things that where we're trying to carry out policies using one methodology or another overseas someplace, but do it in essentially a covert way so that our hand isn't necessarily clear behind that. So that was my career. Out of the 25 years, almost 20 of it were overseas. So I was hardcore operations cadre guy, and that doesn't exist so much anymore. And so a lot of the expertise is dying away as my generation of people die and leave and all of that expertise is leaving us. We just don't do business that way anymore, which is one of the reasons why I founded the organization that's Americans for Intelligence Reform, the website you referred to, intelreform.org, was to sort of combat and bring those things back. Because yes, I mean, you can look at espionage and say it's dirty business or repugnant or whatever you want. But the fact is that the world's a dirty, dangerous place in a lot of ways. And being blind to what's going on in the world creates more death and destruction, not less death and destruction. So the CIA and espionage for the United States of America is a force for good. It helps prevent wars and prevents killing and places where people have no respect for human rights and stuff. As we figure out everything that's going on there, report it back, everybody knows. It helps to deter those sorts of behaviors. So I'll say too, you'd asked as part of your question what it was like, and I'll have to say I was in the agency during the right period because it was a build-up period. There were highs and lows, but for the most part, the period where my career took place was, and I'm fairly recently retired, so it changed. I left before Obama got in, but that period of time was a lot of fun. So I had, there was danger, involved with it and things. I've been in, crashed in a helicopter and been shot at and stuff like that. But, outside of the things that are like that, I don't think anybody particularly likes that, I had a lot of fun, saw a lot of the world, saw a lot of the truth that goes on behind the scenes, and we got to see really, you'd be surprised at the depth of understanding you can develop over time just because you see so much. And also, I was on the ground seeing a lot of things, or behind the scenes making things happen, and would watch what was reported in the United States in the news and stuff. And in a word, the news in the United States mostly sucks. I mean, it's just mostly fantasyland nonsense. And of course, if you point out what's true, they're going, "Oh, well, you're crazy," or whatever. It's like, oh, okay, I was the one there doing it. I can tell you exactly what happened, and you guys are making up what you're saying, and I'm the crazy one. So it's a funny world we live in, and a lot of the things that people think are true aren't true. And who's writing history and all is I guess who's the political winner gets to write the history. But things have changed. Like I said, it's not as fun as it once was, and so I fit in my career at the perfect time and look back at it and with great fondness. And I have personally very supportive of the CIA, and I believe and argue now that it's in a greatly weakened state. So a lot of what I'm pushing for is to recreate a far more powerful and effective CIA.
And why did you join the CIA, Mr. Johnson?
Well, actually, it was kind of a whim. I would say, believe it or not, I mean, these aren't. It's a very rare background, but I came out of business and banking, and so I was, even back in those days, they had the Wall Street Journal. So I was reading the Wall Street Journal one time, and they ran an ad, and this was in that build-up program that I mentioned during the President Reagan administration. And they ran ads in the Wall Street Journal. I don't think the CIA had ever done that before, so it was a brand new technique. And I saw it and laughed. I thought it was very funny. The CIA advertises in the newspaper. I mean, I thought it was funny at the time. Now it's what they do all the time, so it's sort of normal at this point. But I saw that ad, laughed at it, thought that was very funny that the CIA would advertise in the Wall Street Journal of all places. Threw it away and didn't think a thing of it. But 3 or 4 days went by and started thinking, well, that might be an interesting career path. Let me take a look at it. And so I tracked that article back down after a couple of weeks and called in and sent in my resume and a letter and got called back and went through the process, which is not fast. It takes, even in those days, it takes about a year. And now it takes, about that amount of time. So rarely does somebody apply and just get hired and in. I mean, it does happen, but it's rare. Right. And then they have to do a full background check to get you clearance, all those sorts of things. So it takes time. But that was basically it. It was sort of on a whim. Like I said, my first thing was that it was funny, and the second thing was, well, maybe that would be fun and interesting. So applied, got accepted, and here I sit.
What would you say in terms of advice or recommendations to a young person who is thinking about joining the CIA?
Well, I do get asked that question quite often. And I would say, you have to be what they're interested in. So, for example, having language skills and having some travel experience or having technical skills, having a background in those sorts of things would be, what appeals to them. And you can you look on the website, it's CIA.gov. You have to apply through CIA.gov now. There's no other way. And you can see in there that what their priorities are, what they're looking for, and what their interests are, so that you can kind of gauge your background with that. But in general terms, for example, area studies, a degree in a certain area of the world or a certain subject matter, like let's say, nuclear weaponry technology, that sort of thing, plus some language skills, plus some travel experience, and those sorts of things. They'll be interested in your background. Basically, look at it as a checklist. If you can check off enough things on that list of interest, they'll hire you. So, assuming you can get a security clearance.
Who would you not recommend try to join the CIA or try to follow that career path?
Well, that's an interesting question. 20 years ago, I would have given a very distinct answer. Nowadays, I'm not sure. The philosophy involved has changed. And back in my day, it was the objective was to get people in and keep them for a career. Nowadays, the youth, people like your age, if I may, in the business fields, they're looked at differently. They're looked at as far more volatile and changing, where it's rare now for a young person to pick a career, study that in school, get out of school, go into that job at a company and stay there. That's just not the career path anymore. And people want to get out, work someplace for a year or two, work someplace else for a year or two, and jump around between jobs. So that is part of the culture of today, of the youth, and it is a reality that has to be dealt with. So a lot of people go in, get experience for 2 or 3 years, and then move on. Now, in that kind of environment, working at the CIA, no matter what you do, is going to be good onward experience. So I wouldn't necessarily discourage anyone from applying and trying to work a stint in the CIA. I mean, I would say if you're been in a gang and doing gang banging and deal drugs and all that kind of stuff, I would discourage those guys. But for just like normal American person, politics aside, it depends on what your interests are. But I don't think I would discourage anybody as a whole.
Okay, excellent. And you talk about intel reform. What do you see is wrong with the CIA today, Mr. Johnson?
Well, I would say it's the CIA, but it's also the intelligence community. The intelligence community is actually 17 government agencies, which each branch of the military counts as one. But you've got State Department, DEA, FBI, CIA, NSA, all of these together form the intelligence community. And the bottom line problem is that the intelligence community has become highly politicized and highly weaponized. And if you take a dispassionate look at what we've been through since Trump declared himself candidate for president, we've seen the entire system be manipulated by people, particularly in the CIA and FBI and the leadership level. And what they did, for example, the FISA warrant, as soon as that FISA warrant fiasco came out, I read the redacted version of the FISA warrant, and that's the what was used to spy on the Trump campaign and later the Trump presidency. And I knew instantly what had happened because I'm familiar with all that stuff. So the redacted stuff, I knew what was underneath it, and I knew that it was based on a completely false report because I'm familiar with all this stuff. So this Steele dossier, that's not how intelligence works. That, we don't even use the word dossier. I mean, so everything about it was wrong from the very beginning. So guys like myself, we all knew that the whole thing was BS from the beginning. And it went through the Mueller investigation and has gone through all these iterations. Every bit of that is false. And it's even the premise is false. The premise is basically that the Russians want to manipulate the elections in the United States. Okay, fine. That, that there is some truth to that. But by trying to recruit this guy and the campaign, and by trying to attack the way that the voting machines work or any of that stuff, that's all BS, all from the very beginning. I knew instantly, like I said, I knew it was BS because it's legal. And here's what most people don't realize. It is 100% legal for Russia to interfere in US elections. The way that it's legal is lobbying. Russia lobbies in the United States, paying millions of dollars a month, every month, month after month, year after year. And through that lobbying, they're able to impact elections and policies legally. They do it legally. So why would you go to all the trouble and expense to have this very complicated, convoluted plan to do intelligence things over here that have almost no chance of working when you can just legally lobby and that has a very high chance of working? So, I mean, this whole Russia collusion thing is stupid in every way. But you have to know enough to be able to judge all that. But once you put it in context, like right here, as soon as I say it's perfectly legal for Russia to interfere in US elections by using lobbying, everybody hopefully is looking at that going, holy crap, that's right. Yeah, they can do that. And China lobbies.
Just to cut in, Mr. Johnson, Citizens United, is that what makes that illegal?
No, the Congress passed lobbying laws, and those lobbying laws allow foreign countries to come in and lobby. So if Russia wants to come in and lobby for, I don't know let's just pick a hot button subject for Biden, and it doesn't matter what it is, and a hot button subject for Trump. Biden backs this one and Trump backs that one, and they come in and lobby for the one backed by Biden. They're interfering with elections. But that is legal under law passed by Congress, U.S. legislation. Lobbying in the United States by foreign countries is legal. And they impact on U.S. policies and elections every day of the week, 365 days a year through these lobbying efforts. They have guys running around. I mean, I forget what it is, but I think Russia pays $12 million a month for lobbying. Turkey pays something like that. China pays something like that. You start adding this stuff up, foreign countries probably are spending, I've never added it up, but they're probably spending $200 million a month in the United States for lobbying. And, it would be stunningly naive to think that doesn't have impact on elections and policies and all those things in the United States. So again, like I say, this whole thing, this whole FISA fiasco was trash from the very beginning. All the people like myself who have the background and experience to look at all these aspects of it, everybody knew. But yet you had the intelligence community creating it and backing it all along. Now they're disgraced. They've all been fired. They've already had one indictment. These guys are all going to indictment. Most of these guys like Jim Comey and the rest are probably all going to end up in jail because what they did was so clear.
Well, actually, this is on the RARE website. You got John Brennan, Loretta Lynch, Sally Yates, James Clapper, James Comey, Andrew McKay, Bruce Orr, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, Susan Rice, Rod Rosenstein, and 4 other undisclosed high-level former CIAs, all on various accounts of lying, perjury, conspiracy to overthrow government. And these are the people principally you're talking about.
That's exactly correct. And so what happened? And the problem with this is, and here's the politicization part I initially referred to. Whether they get indicted or not doesn't matter. The fact is they acted on their own political beliefs. And this is the activists. Everybody's heard of activist judges, but we also have activist intelligence professionals and law enforcement. They're activists. Well, what does that actually mean? What that actually means, when you have an activist judge, what that means is he doesn't care what the laws are. He doesn't feel that he needs to follow the laws. What he believes, or she, that he should do is what his political beliefs dictate. Now that's stunning, but that's incredibly important. And that's exactly what we have here. With you, when you saw Peter Strzok in particular, because he's been so deeply entwined in all of this, he knew that there was no justification under the law to launch an investigation of Trump. It shows in his own notes from his emails and text messages that he knew. And yet he went ahead with it anyway. He went ahead with it anyway because he's an activist law enforcement guy. He doesn't care what the laws are. What he cares about is what he thinks is politically correct, what is the right thing to do based on his personal politics. He puts his personal politics above the law and acts on what he believes is right, which is that activism, the activist judge, activist law enforcement. Now, that has permeated the intelligence community. And that is dangerous and wrong. It's dangerous in so many ways, but it shows how this political corruption that exists at those senior levels has permeated and lets them go down paths that make us like some third world, nothing country someplace, where you have all these shenanigans going behind the scenes, where there's one set of laws for people like you and me and another set of laws for the guys that have power. And that's the road that they're headed down. That is the road to totalitarianism, because whoever's in charge can use those organs of power to destroy all of his political enemies. The IRS can be used and was used to do that. And we've seen the intelligence community was also used to do that. So that must be eliminated. And just today or yesterday, President Trump made a comment about China wants Joe Biden to win. And so they're backing that horse, if you will. And China has come out and said a lot of positive stuff about Joe Biden. So, I mean, it's true. The toughest guy in the history of the United States on China and since World War II is President Trump. So why would China want President Trump to win? So we all know China wants Biden. I mean, this doesn't require any insight or knowledge or anything. We all know China would rather have Biden. He's going to be more, pliable. And Trump is kicking their butt all the time. So they don't want Trump. So Trump openly acknowledges that. And you have the intelligence community guys coming out saying, Trump is just trying to avoid talking about Russian collusion. Well, that guy is highly political. We already know Russian collusion is BS. We know that all that stuff about China is true. And you have this intelligence community guy coming out basically trying to help Joe Biden out of this mess. So that the intelligence community should not be involved in U.S. domestic politics. They should not be involved. Where they need to be active is looking out overseas, finding out the next time that Al-Qaeda or ISIS wants to put a bomb in a building and kill a few hundred innocent civilians. That's what they need to be going after. The next time, say, Turkey wants to start a war with Greece or something and plan to do it, that's where they need to be, finding out who's going to start a war and start killing people. That's where intelligence needs to be. So this corruption that's drawing all of our energy away from where they should be looking and turning it to internal politics is wrong and dangerous. It will and has gotten people killed, and it's going to continue to detract from our capability to keep an eye on the rest of the world, to keep the world and our nation safe. And let me say, U.S. national security is the most important national security in the world. The reason is because of what we represent. If we had wanted to after World War II, we could have taken over the world.
Oh, yeah.
We could have done it easily. We didn't do it. Why? We don't want to take over the world. All of the opportunities we've had to really step in and take over countries, we've never done it because that's just not what we're after. That's not what we're doing. So every time U.S. national security is strengthened and made better, is better for the entire rest of the world, because what we represent is all of those other countries are not so easily subject to being conquered by some other country nearby. And there's case after case after case. We can talk about Iraq under Saddam Hussein trying to conquer Kuwait and all of that, and we stepped in and stopped it. We didn't keep Kuwait. We invaded it, took it over. We could have kept it, but we didn't. We gave it back to the Kuwaitis and left. That was the first Iraq war. And those guys were all grateful and better off for it. What would their life been like? Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, why do these guys, these Brennans and Comeys and Strucks, why are they so politicized now, and they're trying to advance their own interests? Is it specifically because of Trump, would you say, or what's the motivation, do you think?
Well, it's political. It's what we've seen now. I don't know how, I won't go too, I'll try not to go too far back into the history of it, but essentially what we've seen during the Democratic presidential administrations, Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama, we've seen the bureaucratization of everyone. After World War II, this started out in State Department. U.S. Department of State is very, very, very liberal left-wing organization. And the problem with leftist philosophy is the way they judge situations. And if you look at all of those administrations, for example, who do they pick to be, say, in charge of economic issues? If you look at a Republican, because republicanism, conservatism, is the one of self-reliance, freedom of the individual, all of those sorts of things within the philosophy, who you pick is who you think is the most competent, that's acceptable. And that's who you pick. Like, for example, Trump picked Larry Kudlow. Larry Kudlow, like him or hate him, whatever, he's got a lot of experience and is a highly competent guy in the world of economics. He knows his stuff and helped spearhead one of the greatest recoveries of the economy that the United States has ever had, where we saw the lowest unemployment for blacks, Hispanics, and other minority groups since the first day records were kept. Now, that was what you saw under Reagan, for example. But under a Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, that's not how they pick the people to fill those slots. They don't care what that person's background in economics is. What they care about is he politically loyal, because that's the leftist philosophy. You want people who are loyal to the party first. Their experience is secondary, and it's the exact reverse. So under that philosophy, the people that were put into power during those periods of the Democratic administrations, they judge who they put in that pipeline to leadership. And the way they judge who they put into that pipeline to leadership is based on party loyalty. So you have all these leftist extremists that have gotten into that pipeline and have ended up as leaders now from all these previous periods of time. And I'll say, I mean, something that most people don't focus on, but James Comey, the former CIA director, and John Brennan, the former CIA director, both talked about in their past having voted for the Communist Party. They both were essentially communists. Now, how the frack did those guys get into those positions of power? Not on competence, not on their experience. They were picked because they were very loyal to the leftist philosophy of the party. So that's how they got picked. That is one of the central issues affecting federal government today. And again, that's one of the central issues that I try to address at all times. And in doing these interviews and stuff, I try to put as much information out on this as I can, because people need to understand that. Now, I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican. You have to look at, or an independent for that matter, but you have to look at the power that resides within these federal agencies and say, you know, do you want them to be politically driven? Because, my friends, that's a two-edged sword. That can cut either way. Or do you want them to be apolitical servants of the people? And I am of the ilk that I want them to be apolitical servants of the people, doing the business of the United States of America and staying the hell out of politics. And what we have now is all these guys are in politics all the time, out of the military, out of the IRS, out of the CIA, out of the FBI. They're just like today, like I said, there was this guy that was a former high-level guy in the intelligence community out, you know, bad-mouthing Trump. You know, that does not belong. That needs to be stopped, because it takes us to third world status and to totalitarianism, because what it means is that the powers of the federal government can be used for personal political beliefs. Mm-hmm. And if I come to power as president of the United States, which I have no political ambition, not going to happen, but if I did, and that was that was what we were living under, I replace everybody in all of those agencies with my henchmen. And if your show is extreme left wing, you're done. The IRS will get you, whoever will get you that I need to get you to stop your show. And that's what we see ourselves edging into. That's wrong. Like I said, it's a two-edged sword. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican or independent. You have to look at this as bad. We have to get rid of all that stuff. It's just, it's too much.
We can modify or adjust the CIA. We don't have to dismantle it, because I have heard ex-CIA operatives say they think it should be completely dismantled and a new intelligence agency created. But you think there's still a chance to save it, to salvage it?
Well, the answer to that question is actually fairly simple. The CIA cannot be fixed with who's there.
Yeah.
Could it be fixed? Yes, but not with who's there. And so my actual recommendation, it's something I've talked about publicly before, but my recommendation is right now we have a director of national intelligence, which is, as useful as one more word on a warthog. I mean, it was this thing created for political reasons, going back a little bit, following 9/11, where the Twin Towers in New York got, destroyed by the airplanes. They created a commission of a bunch of politicians. It was lawyers, academics, and politicians. So they were all non-operators. None of them had ever done, with maybe an exception of a year or two here or there, you had this group of very senior older people that had a lot of bureaucratic experience, but no direct operational experience. So what did they come up with? More bureaucracy. Where if you'd have taken a bunch of guys like myself, if you'd have taken a bunch of military operators, a bunch of law enforcement operators, a bunch of pure intelligence operators like myself, put us on a commission, what we would have come up with was practical solutions to these problems, and we would have destroyed terrorism. But what they did is they created Department of Homeland Security, Director of National Intelligence, but be that as it may, we've now got a Director of National Intelligence. So as soon as that was invented, it was meant to be like a dozen people kind of overseeing and administering intelligence to make sure it ran smoothly. Instead, it started to grow. Pretty soon it was 100 people, then a couple hundred people, then hundreds, and now thousands. So it's just grown. It's just one more layer of bureaucracy. So what I would do is try to kill a couple birds with one stone. I would take the DNI, put him over at the CIA, make him in charge of all analysis for the government. I mean, other people would have some too, but make the Central Intelligence Agency the center of analysis for the government and put him in charge of it. I would take the operations efforts 100% out of the CIA because it just can't be fixed with who's there. I would take it away. I would absorb the intelligence out of the military, absorb the intelligence out of the CIA, and create a new organization that would handle all of the espionage and covert action for the United States of America as a separate organization. And that would not have anything to do with analysis. They would be in completely two separate agencies, because one of the worst mistakes we ever made was to embed them with each other because they cross-contaminate. And what you want is complete separation of all your operations, so nobody knows who those spies are that we have around the world, and we keep them safe. But their information gets over to the analysts so they can use it to figure out what's going on in the world and pass it up to policymakers, to the politicians. And I will say, since that went away, one of the things that has happened is year after year after year after year, we see all the agents that working for the CIA get killed. There's always some excuse. Oh, it's communications problems, blah, 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 blah. They all die. Well, what the frack good is that? I mean, that's stupid. None of that stuff would have happened during my days on our watch. It just wouldn't have happened because you don't have analysts calling up people who report to us overseas. You don't have those separate communications. You don't have people running operations that are analysts. And it's very important to understand that operations discipline requires a lot of experience and time to develop. It's not easy to run espionage, but now it's treated as like, well, anybody can do it. And so, what happens? Like I said, just look at the last 10 years, and what did we have? I think there were 19 Chinese spies supposedly working for the CIA, which everyone says is true. They were pulled out of their office, taken out the front door, and shot on the front sidewalk, executed for spying for the CIA. And another 5 or 6 were arrested, tortured, and later killed. Well, so 20 some odd people were wrapped up in a single day, or it was a short period of time. And it was because of the communications program that was no good. And they were all using the same communications program. I mean, just stuff that would have never, ever, ever happened before. So this whole thing is a mess. It's not working well. As I said, it gets people killed and killed all the time. And there are a lot of other stories like that. I'll mention one more. There was a bombing in Khost, and it was on the Iraqi, the Afghanistan border. And it was where they were looking for Osama bin Laden back in the days before Osama bin Laden got killed. And what happened is they had this source that was going to come in and tell us where Osama bin Laden was. So they greeted him in 2 semicircles with like the main group of people in the front and then another line of people behind them. And that guy walked into the middle of it and went boom and blew himself up and killed, 6 or 7 people and wounded another 6 or 7 more. Well, that person who was in charge there, it was a base, it was Khost base, was an analyst. She was the chief of base, which is an operations position.
Yeah, the female station chief who I heard someone say she kind of got appointed without much training, and it was kind of a political diversity hire. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that's it. So, I mean, no fault of hers, and I don't blame her, and she gave her life for her country. But that's management's fault. That girl and those people are dead because management decided that having operations people in operations slot is no longer important. I mean, stunning stupidity. I mean, it is a separate discipline. It's, the comparison I like to use, the metaphor, if you will, is a brain surgeon. Brain surgeons now, case officers are not as smart as brain surgeons, but it's still a highly specialized discipline. And you don't want to go to a dentist who extracts teeth and get brain surgery, right? Because that's not their discipline. They don't have that training experience. It's the same thing to put analysts in ops positions. Any operator, no matter how junior, because of the training you get and the experience you get, you don't meet this guy with 14 or 15 people standing around him in a circle because you don't know who precisely he is. And he could just as easily be a guy who's going to blow himself up, which is what happened. And so you would have him searched before he even comes in there. But there was nobody there with that operational experience. Not one CIA trained operations officer was involved. Not one. They were in the slots, but that wasn't their background. Okay. Again, this is the type of decision. This is how decisions are made today that gets people killed.
Mm-hmm. And before we move
management.
on, Mr. Johnson, so a guy like Brennan, for example, what's his loyalty? Who is he loyal to? Is he only loyal to John Brennan?
Well, no. I mean, I think in that sense, he's loyal to the party. I think he's loyal to Barack Obama. I think, just watching him, he's on MSNBC and NPR and things like that. And I would say he's got some pretty wild sort of delusional ego kind of things going on in his head. But I've never met him in person. I've been where he's been at certain events and have listened to him speak and things like that. So he's one of those people that I look at, and this is very common. Most people analyze him about the same, is that how did that guy ever get in the position of being in charge of the CIA? He was so clearly over his head and just not competent to be able to work at that level. But the reason he did was because he was an apparatchik. He was part of the party. He was a staffer on the Hill and knew Barack Obama. And so he was a party loyalist in the party. And that's, again, it's that selection process. He was not picked to be CIA director because he was competent. He was picked because he was loyal to the party. And he had a little bit of background in the CIA. So it was perfect for them because the emphasis is loyalty, not competence.
Mm-hmm. And then, as far as this pandemic and lockdown, Mr. Johnson, what are your thoughts on this whole COVID pandemic and lockdown situation we find ourselves in?
Well, interesting too. I mean, I don't think anyone believes that there's not politics involved with this. So I have a lot of questions about just all of that. I don't think I have all the clear answers to all of it because you have so many factions pulling in so many directions. It's not just two sides pushing. It's a whole bunch of factions pushing in a whole bunch of directions. So a couple of things that really worry me that we've seen. First of all, we all can agree on certain basic things. China has lied to us all the way along. We all know that. This was apparent in China in December that it was a problem. They had already been infected. They already knew it was coming, yet they said nothing. So it was surprised on the world. Now, why? My personal theory is because the Chinese New Year is the biggest holiday in China, and they make billions of dollars in income from travelers coming to China for Chinese New Year. Well, COVID hit just before that. They didn't want to turn off and shut down Chinese New Year because they need the hard currency. So they went ahead and went through it and allowed the new year to go. And after that, in January is where you started to see news come out about this. So my theory is that that's why they let this go so long, was because of the money. Kind of a cold decision to make, right? Because a lot of people have died around the world for this.
I actually haven't heard that theory yet, Mr. Johnson. So that I think that does make some sense, though, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, what that did is people come from all over the world to China, Chinese New Year, then they all go home. And suddenly one day we woke up and COVID was all around the world. Makes you go, And, it's one of those things. Usually it's power or money that makes the world go round. Sometimes it's sex, but it's almost always power and money. And so in this case, I think it was the money. And so China just has never told us the truth on any of this. They're manipulating all the time. I follow their propaganda and the stuff they put out. So I watch their little propaganda videos about how they're trying to save the world and this was some accident. So we don't know. There's a lot of information out there about this virus that does not suggest it naturally occurred. We know, for example, absolute facts, that China over the last 10 years has had their both military and civilian intelligence agencies working on virus issues. We had a Chinese head of the level 4 lab in Calgary get sent home for spying for the Chinese. What were they studying there? Coronavirus. We've had several labs here in the United States have the same problems. They got arrested and caught. Some of these people are in jail today for stealing vials of samples of what? Viruses. So this is over a 10-year period. So 100% we know their intelligence agencies were working on viruses for a very long time. Where do they all go back to? Wuhan, their level 4 lab in Wuhan, the origin of this virus. So let me just, in case there's any doubts on anybody's mind, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Chinese intelligence and Chinese military intelligence do not work on cures for a virus. They work on bioweapons. They work on weapons system. They steal technology. They do not work on cures for a virus. So why were these guys stealing all that stuff? Why does it all lead back to Wuhan? And then why did this originate in Wuhan? Now, is that proof that they built this virus on purpose? Or at least we're in the midst of working on it on purpose and it escaped? Or was it released on purpose? I mean, I'm not arguing that this is proof, but I would say to ignore the evidence, knowing that Chinese intelligence was working on viruses, all that going back to Wuhan, and then this escaping from Wuhan, to ignore that is idiocy, because clearly that means something, and nobody's looking at how to figure out what that means. Another part of that, we've seen our institutes and universities come out and say all this stuff about this virus being man-made, created, virus of anything. That's all, wild speculation. There's no proof. There's no evidence. All of those places, as it turns out, were getting money from China. They had people on their board members bringing in millions of dollars worth of grants. And those are the people that are under the influence of China that are the ones arguing that there's no evidence that this is a man-made virus. The independent people are those voices that you hear out there saying, well, wait a minute. I don't know for 100% for sure, but this is weird, this is weird, this is weird. That is an indicator that this was a manufactured virus, not a natural occurring virus. It needs more study. So you look at those two things and go, and by the way, the FBI, if there's any doubts, we just saw the head of the chemistry department at Harvard, I believe it was, Harvard, I think, who's in jail now, I think. He was arrested and indicted for spying for the Chinese. And we've seen about 24 people, Chinese, working for the Chinese. Yes. And they've been kicked out of both the institutes and the universities for working for the Chinese. And that's the source of the people that are telling us this is not man-made. It's natural. Well, again, I don't look at this and say, okay, that's proof this is man-made, but it's evidence. It's something to ignore. It would be, again, stupid. But yet, nobody talks about this openly. Now, this virus stuff is hard science, and people can figure it out, but we need to look at it rationally and openly, put it all on the table and figure it out and get the politics the hell out of this so we can all learn the truth. Was this manufactured by China? I don't know. I don't think anybody here is 100% for sure, but there's some good indicators that it was. There's some indicators that it wasn't too. So all that has to really be looked at and figured out, but yet that's not what's happening. So, I look at all this and just all I see is level of politics after level of politics. I see I'm being lied to by a lot of people, and I don't like any of it, but, what's the way out? I'm not sure. And it's very convenient for the Democratic Party to have the economy be destroyed and to have to all wear masks and to restrict. And if you look at the map of the states where Democratic governors are in charge, the economies are worse and the controls over the people are far more stringent. Mm-hmm. And in the areas where it's Republican controlled, the economies are far stronger with less rules. And you don't see a difference in the corona. If anything, on the average, the corona is worse in the Democratic areas. So what does all this mean? And it's so complex and there's so much to it, and so many people are pushing and pulling in all these different directions, and so many people are lying. I don't know, but it pisses me off. I'll put it that way. The whole thing pisses me off. I know I'm being lied to. It's just like, how do I figure out what exactly is true? And who do you trust on this? I mean, I don't trust any of those a-holes, not a one of them.
And
certainly not Bill Gates.
Yeah. Let's pivot, Mr. Johnson. I wanted it because I saw you post at least one video about Mr. Jeffrey Epstein, the infamous and Ghislaine Maxwell. I wanted to know your thoughts on the Epstein saga. Well,
I'm definitely a kind of a law and order sort of guy. So any form of pedophilia is, I'm going to, you can predict where I'm going to fall on the issue. I'm not going to like that sort of thing. I think that's wrong. And Epstein got away with a lot of stuff for a long time. He was involved with a lot of politicians and important people. I find his death very suspicious. Again, I don't know. There's mixed information coming out of all of this. I find it very unlikely that a guy like that would commit suicide. I find his supposed suicide, again, very suspicious. I don't know. But he did bad. He did illegal activities, and he was using it, I think, to make money. And I think what he did was he would ingratiate himself with people in power, including Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton had a lot of trips on the Lolita Express, the airplane, and to his private island. And what Bill Clinton came out with is just vintage Clintons. He came out and said, I only met him, twice at blah, 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 and was on the plane once, but that was to go to this nonprofit, blah, blah, blah. But what he did is he defined a period of time. He said, in that period of time, this is what happened. But in the year before that, he made 25 trips on the Lolita Express and went to his private island 10 times. So, I mean, it's one of those things where that's the type of guy that Epstein, I believe, targeted. And he would bring Bill Clinton little girls, which, we all know that would appeal to Bill Clinton. I mean, there's no, that's the kind of guy he is. and a lot of other people too, including Prince Andrew and different people that like being around these very attractive little girls. And so once he had them in, it was like, yeah, dude, cut me in on that business deal. I want to make another 100 million over here and over here. So, I mean, I think that's where he made his money. I don't think there's tremendous mystery to it. I think he was very shrewd and cruel and selfish in that, and used little girls to get in the pants of these rich people and take advantage of that relationship then to get cut in on their business deals. And I think that's where he made his money, and that was him. Now, his girlfriend, I don't know what the FBI has said about her, Maxwell, is that they've already got a lot of videos and tapes and stuff like that, so she doesn't have much to negotiate with. I don't know. I'm not sure what to think of her role in this whole thing. But if she comes out and says everything she knows, there's going to be a lot of people in trouble. So again, she was one of those. I said this before Epstein got killed, that if Epstein gets killed, it's going to be very suspicious, but they did it anyway. So it makes me think that Maxwell, if this is indeed was a murder, she's got to be on somebody's short list, because she knows a lot of names, a lot of people, a lot of guys that were involved with these little girls and women, by the way. She was also, would have sex with these little girls too. So, at any rate, I think it's a very dirty business. I don't like any of it. I hope they all get caught. I hope the information comes out. I hope she, sings like a little birdie and gives all those names up. And I don't care if they're Republicans. I don't care if they're Democrats. I don't care who they are. If they're out doing that stuff, I hope she sings like a birdie and we get them all and put them all in jail.
And somewhat related, what are your thoughts on Israel?
Well, the situation in Israel is always precarious. My basic argument to anyone would be in the form of a question, and that is the United States safer and better off with a democratic Israel in the Middle East? And I think pretty clearly the answer is yes. And it just makes the world that little bit more stable. So I'm very pro-Israel. I want Israel to continue to exist. I don't believe they should be destroyed, which is what a lot of the world argues. I was very happy to see President Trump bite the bullet and move the embassy to Jerusalem. I thought that was actually kind of the right move. It's, this vote to do it, but then never enact it, sort of halfway crap. Either do it or don't do it. And we voted to do it, so just go ahead then and do it. And we've seen some great progress kind of as a result of some of this backing and this sort of new way of viewing Israel. And for example, this peace treaty that just got approved between United Arab Emirates, UAE, and Israel, I think that's a wonderful step forward. I think in many ways it's a recognition of a change in the power structure in the greater Middle East area, with Turkey having become a very aggressive country, which the head of the Mossad came out and mentioned like 3 or 4 days ago, that very thing, that Turkey used to be an ally of theirs, but now they're not, and they've become a very aggressive, expansionist, radical Islamic republic, which I think is accurate. And so you've seen a lot of countries nearby now start to look at Turkey with a lot of trepidation and fear. And I think that's part of the reason, or a reason, why UAE was willing to negotiate a peace treaty with Israel. You've seen Egypt kind of come down on that side, and they're fighting Turkey and Libya. And there's fighting going on with the Turks in Syria against the Kurds. The Turks are fighting in Azerbaijan in the Nagorno-Karabakh region against the Armenians, who are backed by Russia. I mean, they're moving in just now. In the last few days, they were caught moving a lot of ammunition and militia type troops into northern Lebanon. Lebanon is in meltdown, and it's being kind of absorbed by Iran and Turkey now in the north. So I mean, they're just very aggressive, expanding, and the Arab countries are looking at all this. Arab countries used to be under the domination of the Ottoman Empire, stuff that for us as ancient history is very fresh in their minds. And they're afraid of all that. So you're seeing the Arab countries start to look at this whole Turkey thing and go, oh boy, let's get ready because there's problems forming here. There's clouds on the horizon. And Turkey has repeatedly threatened to go to war with Greece for them to be able to drill in the Greek islands for gas and oil product, or deposits that are there. So they're going to do it. They're going to fight over that. I just don't see Turkey backing down. So Israel is also, again, it's a bastion out in that area of the world. It's one in which we can see people start to coalesce around them, which is is positive for us in the United States. Again, where you can see, say, Egypt and UAE and Saudi Arabia and Israel, and these countries all start to sort of work out their problems and unite with each other against a common enemy. That's good. That's good. We don't want people who start wars. We want people who try to maintain peace, democracy, trade, all of those things. So it's a good force. So in the general sense, I'm pro-Israel. Are they a perfect ally? They're not. There's a guy sitting in jail right now whose name escapes me, but he's sitting in jail because he was conducting espionage against the United States of America, an American citizen with a clearance that was spying for Israel. So Pollard is one of them sitting in jail, I think, still. Was he the one spying for Israel? I've kind of forgotten. But I think you have the name correct. Pollard was a spy that was arrested, and I think he was the Israeli one, but don't hold me to it. I think that's right, though.
I'll check that afterwards. But I wanted to ask you what do you think of their treatment of the Palestinians, as far as, I've seen videos of, snipers shooting Palestinian boys, and, you got the maiming children and stuff like that. And it kind of seems like there's an apartheid going on over there. And what are your thoughts?
Well, those things are a two-way street. And I've spent a lot of time in that area of the world and very familiar with the kind of the ins and outs of it. There was a period back in the Clinton days where they took a look at the Palestinian Authority, and that was Yasser Arafat was still alive back in those days. And Yasser Arafat said, our list of demands is this. The Israeli prime minister and Clinton took one look at that. They're going, oh my God, that's a terrible list, but okay. So they went to Yasser Arafat and said, okay, we'll give you everything on your list. We'll give you everything you want. Let's go sign the peace treaty. And Yasser Arafat said, no, now I want all this other stuff. And he, even getting everything he asked for, everything on his list, he wouldn't sign a peace treaty. Why? Well, the reason is, again, like I said, it's power and money. Yasser Arafat knew that if he signed a treaty and became this Palestinian Authority in these small lands of Palestine, he would be like a local mayor in a small town. He'd be nothing. He'd be pulled off the world stage where he's getting money from all these Arab countries. He's worshipped around the world, gets to go all these different places. It's not to the Palestinian advantage for the people in power to have peace. They've always turned it down. They always come up with more requirements. It is their methodology because they don't want peace. So what do they have to do? They have to keep things stirred up and going and fighting to keep the situation prominent and relevant. So the impetus for this comes from the Palestinians. Now, fine, it's, are there excuses for it and justifications? Yeah, I think there are some. But nevertheless, you have to look at who's creating the impetus for the violence. And it's not the Israelis. It is the Palestinians. And they also blast rockets down on schools and hospitals or whatever. A lot of innocent Israeli Jews also get killed by the Palestinian attack. So it's a two-way street where one of the people in there is the instigator of the vast majority of the violence, and they have no interest in peace. So the balance of negative judgment has to come down on them. Now, do innocent Palestinians get hurt and killed and stuff? Yes. Do the Israelis greatly mistrust them? Yes. Do the Israelis have reason to greatly distrust them? The answer is yes to all of those. So, again, Does Turkey have some reasons to feel that they're entitled to drill in Greek waters? They do. They have their reasons they believe in very strongly, but they're still the aggressor. And they're going into Greek waters to steal Greek resources. They believe they're justified. It's a very similar situation with the Palestinians. And again, I'm not trying to present the Israelis as, angel perfect anything. They're not. But if you take this all in balance, Israel would be very happy to have peace. And there's a lot of solutions being knocked around. A two-state, a one-state. They would go with almost any peace solution, but the Palestinians will not. So again, it's in balance, looking at it fairly. There's more guilt on the part of the Palestinians for no peace treaty than there is on the part of the Israelis for no peace treaty. So I don't want to use a bad word, but it's a goat rope. I'm not sure there's a great solution out there for us. I wish there were. I would love to see, peace in that region. It would take a lot of pressure off a lot of things, and support for terrorism would be cut in some ways too. So I would love to see it. But as long as one party just absolutely will not agree to peace, you can't have peace. Both sides have to be willing to have it.
Mm-hmm. Before we sign off here, Mr. Johnson, I wanted to ask you about law enforcement. As we spoke a bit before the show about it, what are your thoughts on everything that's going on right now with the police in the United States?
I think this is an absolute travesty. Now, as I mentioned to you, look, basically I'm a law and order kind of guy, because if the judicial system and law enforcement work in a country, that country can function and live. I've lived in countries where law enforcement and the judicial system was basically whoever had either the most guns or the most money could buy off law enforcement, could buy off the judges, and would prevail. We don't want that. That's bedlam, chaos, murder. You just don't want that. So we want these systems to work. And again, you have to take this in balance. Are police perfect? No. Do certain police do really dumb thwhat like just the optics of that knee on the throat of Mr. Floyd? Oh God, what a dumbass cop that was. I mean, I'm sorry. He deserves his day in court. He should have his chance to prove his case or not. There are some information out there that Mr. Floyd was badly messed up and on drugs and was going to die anyway. I don't know. That's what courts are for. Let him go through it. But that knee on the throat thing and him saying, help, I can't breathe, and all that sort of stuff. Oh my God. Are cops like that? No, that was one guy. If you compare law enforcement as a whole compared to the U.S. population as a whole, you have fewer criminals within law enforcement than you do within the population as a whole, as a percentage. So by and large, law enforcement are good guys trying to do the right thing, doing a good job. Now, they have some things I don't like. And you had a video up of some guy sitting in his car that got his window broken and pulled out of his car and things like that. And I think one of the pieces that you had done, now that, again, it isn't a good optic, but what did you have that guy doing? What you had that guy doing was defying the police. Now, he was doing it in kind of a polite way and non-confrontational and wasn't yelling. He was calm and all that. But it doesn't change the fact that he was defying the orders of the policeman. When the policeman, has you for whatever reason, you have to comply. And the laws are all set up that way. Now, afterwards, you can sue him, you can fight him in court, you can do whatever you want, and there's plenty of backing that you'll get for that. But that's the time when you do it. And everyone needs to understand that that's how we keep our system up and running and working. At the time when the police officer says, give me your ID or turn off your engine or, get out of your car and come over here, you have to comply. And then that is the law. So by not complying, you're breaking the law. And even if you're breaking it, being polite and being nice and, being gentle in how you speak and all that, it doesn't change those facts. So that's a good example. I liked that example because of, I felt sorry for the guy, But he's being an idiot. I would say a very immature reaction to the situation. He should have just got out of his car and just faced the music for whatever it was and made the best out of it. And if he had a case against the cops, it's afterwards. Now, a lot of these cops, and what's happening, and some of the statistics that you see, there are more policemen, law enforcement, being assassinated today than there are cops shooting unarmed black men in the United States today. More cops are dying than unarmed black men. And a lot of the stuff that there are people where there are people
the source for that, Mr. Johnson?
Oh, that's been in the news a lot. That's all over. You can look it up. How many policemen were assassinated this past year? And it was 24 or 8 or something like that. And how many unarmed black men were shot? And it was, I don't know, what, 5 or 3 or something like that. Very few. It wasn't close. And for example, like that guy that just ran to his car that was, what, 2 days ago, 3 days ago that got shot. And he'd had a long rap sheet, had a lot of confrontations with police and fights with police, had already been fighting for the police, and went to his car and opened the door, and they tried to stop him from doing it. And he reached in, had a knife, and was pulling it out. That's, what do you think is going to happen? That's not an unarmed man behaving and is just innocently standing there talking to his family and gets shot. That's not what happens. And these things like the hands up, don't shoot, that case, that guy broke the skull of the policeman in the car and was wrestling to get his gun. And that policeman ended up shooting him. In most of those cases, the truth is quite different than what a very small segment reports on it. So if you actually go back and look at it, most of these things are justifiable kills, if you want to put it that way, which is kind of cruel. But
tasers or tackled him while he had their back to him. I mean, he took his time going around the car there, I think.
He did, but they didn't know what he was going to do. I mean, you have to look at this. If you stand back and with hindsight watch the whole tape, you could say, well, right at that point, they should have tased him. Well, okay, that's easy to do. But when you're in an emergency situation, and I've lived through situations that are dangerous, you don't have the benefit of hindsight. None of those cops knew that he was going to go around, open the door, and pull out a knife. How did they know that? They can't read the future. We knew what he ended up doing. And there was probably along the lines a bunch of other stuff that could have been done had you known what was going to happen. But not knowing, you always have to look at this is, what did that guy know at the time? He didn't know what that guy was going to do. He just didn't know. And I think what they were trying to do is subdue him without being too rough. I think that was what it looked to me like they were trying to do, because they didn't just walk up with a baton and smack him in the back of the head. They could have done that too. In hindsight, maybe that would have been the better thing. Just walk up and, knock him down, or in the back of the legs and knock him down. But that's so judged as police brutality now. But that guy would have been alive if they had done that versus what happened. That these policemen were being really careful, and they were trying not to jostle him. They were trying to get him to submit verbally. Turn around, give us your hands. You're under arrest. Stop. And he did not, and went for the knife. Well, I understand how that ruffles feathers, and people look at this as something bad by the police, but it is not. Those police were following their training. As soon as somebody reaches for a deadly weapon, and let me say, this is shown in all statistics everywhere. If you're within 7 feet of somebody, a knife is more deadly than a gun. And this is in training all over the world. The CIA gets it, the military gets it, all law enforcement get it. If you're within close range, a knife is more deadly, because you can stab a guy 5 times while the other guy's still trying to draw his gun to fire. And it is a fact. And trained to everybody. So that guy with a knife a foot away from the law enforcement guy was very dangerous. And you don't know who else he would stab and kill. Who else could he get to? So whenever it gets to the point that the guy you're trying to arrest and subdue gets lethal force in his hands, you have to stop him. And even tasers can be lethal. If I was standing over somebody, or a law enforcement guy who's standing over somebody and just tased him over and over and over, you can kill somebody that way. So it can be used as a deadly weapon. And I mentioned the other guy that was apparently stoned or drunk or whatever and fell asleep in the drive-through lane of the Wendy's, and the Wendy's called the cops on him, and he got out and started fighting the cops, and he stole a taser and tried to shoot the cop with the taser, and the cop returned fire and shot him. I think, I don't remember if that guy lived or died. Forgive me. It's a case that took place a few months ago. But that's it. That's if the guy that they're trying to arrest gets deadly force in his hand, that is where that's where the line is drawn for the cops to draw their weapon and drop him. And in all of these cases, that's what's happened. If you do not put yourself in the position where you have deadly force available to you, they're not going to shoot you. If you do, they will shoot you. So you can't look at any of those cases and say the guy who died was completely innocent. You have to look at it and say the preponderance of reason why that guy is dead is on his own shoulders. Don't draw a knife on a cop.
One last question on police.
If he had kept doing what he's.
Oh yeah,
What's that?
I was going to say just the last question on police. What do you think of qualified immunity for police? Do you think that is something that should be removed, or do you think that's fine by you as it stands today?
Well, problems with terms like that is they're manipulated and used a lot of different ways. I would just define it this way. If the policeman follows his training and follows his procedures and does properly what he was trained to do, then at least that officer, you have to look at where the burden of responsibility falls. And you remember the case in Coast that I talked about. Okay, that girl that was there that got everybody blown up, she was the one that got them blown up, but it wasn't her fault because she wasn't prepared for that type of position. It was management's fault. I would make a similar argument for law enforcement. If they did what they were trained to do, follow the procedures as they were trained to do, and did everything right, but that man dies and it was wrong, they did something wrong as a result, whose fault is that? That's not their fault. That's management's fault because they taught them wrong then. Now, nobody teaches knee on the throat, but that guy did knee on the throat. He did it wrong. Some of those other cops are saying, hey, let's set him up and stuff. If he had gotten off that guy, Mr. Floyd, taken his knee off the throat, set him up, or even stand him up, and he died anyway, I would say those cops are clean because they did everything they were supposed to do. That guy also fought the cops, and they subdued him, handcuffed him, and then would have sat him up, and and he's sitting there. If he drops over dead, well, if you drop over dead and you're just sitting there, well, why is that my fault? That's something else going on there. So it could have been an injury, but again, don't fight the cops if you don't want to get injured. It's you have to understand that person would have to shoulder the majority of the blame for getting in a fist fight with cops. And what do you think is going to happen? You're going to get you're going to be subdued. So that's the thing. If the policemen are doing what they're supposed to do, if they're doing what they're trained to do, and the result is considered negative, that's not those police officers' fault. That's the management fault. They need to train the procedures, change the procedures, and retrain the cops to do the things properly. So is that a qualified immunity? I mean, yes, it is. And they're hiding, in that sense, behind their training. But that's political. We elect those people that make a lot of those decisions. So if that guy in management, if that police chief and mayor are making the wrong decisions, and they're training the cops in a way that gets innocent people killed, well, that's their fault. I mean, the cop is doing what he's trained to do. So I think under circumstances like that, it is not correct in any way, legally, morally, or whatever, to blame the law enforcement officer. And in most of these cases, like I said, those law enforcement officers are following those procedures, which is, as I mentioned, the bad guy gets a lethal weapon in his hand. You have to stop the situation because a lot of cases that can escalate, and you want to avoid innocent people getting killed both ways. And how many times have we seen in drive-by shootings and guys firing guns in different ways for different reasons, innocent people getting killed? And those sorts of cases happen all the time too. So the police, by and large, are saving lives and making us as safe as we can be. So it's a tough job. And there needs to be recognition of just how difficult that is, and some leeway in the law if they're doing their job properly to not be not be unfairly charged.
Do you have any final asks of the audience, Mr. Johnson? I know you got your website, untilreform.org. You got your YouTube channel, and we both have about similar size audiences. Mr. Johnson, I really enjoyed this talk today. I learned a lot, and I'd love to do it again if you'd be up for it. Help you grow your channel, and likewise, maybe have a mutually beneficial YouTube chat going on. But yeah, any final requests or asks of the audience to check out your website or other things, articles, etc.?
No, I would appreciate if everyone has the opportunity to go to YouTube. I'm on Facebook and Twitter, and by the way, I'm throttled on Twitter for whatever it's worth. And I do have some of my stuff gets censored by YouTube and things like that. So I do get targeted those ways, which I would say to everyone listening, I mean, if you may not like my opinion, you may not like the way I say it, but I think I present a rational argument for why I say what I say. So on that basis, if anyone disagrees, that's great. If it's just call me names, which that happens sometimes too, I don't really care. I've been called worse, so it's fine. But I would say everyone, please feel free to go look on any of social media. I'm usually everywhere, but certainly the website is probably the main repository of information. And feel free to follow. We do put out little kind of newsletter things to people. So appreciate any interest. And I suspect that your audience is younger than my audience, as I said. So to have some younger people come in and take a look would be kind of nice. I appreciate the give and take in comments and the feedback on YouTube. And some of these discussions are really lively. So I enjoy the give and take, and am willing to listen to the opposite perspective of people to lay out their arguments. So I'm glad to hear it. So anyone can feel free to go check it out at untilreform.org.
Awesome. Will do. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And as I stated at the beginning of our chat, all of Mr. Johnson's links are in the description box below of this video, so people can check out all of his socials, channels, etc. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Stay frosty, folks. Cheers to all our patriots worldwide, not just Americans, but Canadians, Australians, our British folk, and anyone else who may be listening as well. Cheers, and until next time, folks.